What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. All right, mailbag. I agree with 90% of your takes, but Ant is simply too high on this list. Recency bias kills media members and fans so much. So I'm not going to get too far into it because Ant is next for me at number 5, so we're going to do a lot of talking about it in the next video, but I'll do a really quick synopsis of it. First of all, Ant just came off of a Western Conference Finals run where he averaged 28, 7, and 7 on 60% true shooting. In the process, he swept a KD super team and eliminated the defending champs, including in Game 7, completely shutting down Jamal Murray in the second half of Game 7. Like, that's an insane playoff run. And if literally, if any of the guys that we have in the top 4 had that same playoff run, everyone would be like, oh, this is what superstars do. But for some reason with Ant, it's getting overshadowed. And I think the main reason why is because he ran into Luka and he really struggled. And there were a couple different factors there. I think Luka's aura had an impact, right? Like, and we've seen that before, right? Like Jason Tatum, awesome. The entire 2022 playoff run, ran into Steph, had a bad series, right? Steph, when he was younger, like, you'd be really good playoff player. And then he run into like 2015, 2016, Steph wasn't very good when he ran into LeBron. There was like a little bit of a struggle there for Steph to get to the point where he was competing at LeBron's level in those series. 2017, 2018, the playoff, the play-in game in 2021, the series in 2023, Steph was much more at LeBron's level. But in 2015 and 2016, LeBron just outplayed him. And like even LeBron in his early part of his careers, like in his career, like he'd run into that Celtics team and he would struggle. He'd run into the Spurs team and struggle under the aura of guys like KG, Paul Pierce, Tony Parker, Tim Duncan. That's like a typical thing that we see happen with young stars. And so Ant had an iffy series in the Western Conference Finals against Luka Doncic, who we all agree is like one of the top two or three players in the league. Like even Bucks fans will have him third, right? So for whatever reason, that whole playoff run just got swept away, even though he was like literally fucking incredible for the first 2 rounds, right? Like, and so I think that's a little ridiculous. To be clear, a lot of this has to do with the criteria of my list. If everyone was healthy and I had a playoff series starting tomorrow, Ant would be lower. He'd be in the 9, 10, 11 range. But the playoff series doesn't start tomorrow. In this scenario, his first playoff game would be like 9 months from now. And he'd have another 80 plus games of experience before then. And so like that to me, like I actually think I'm projecting Ant is going to be a top 5 player this year. But the main reason why, like as I mentioned, I didn't see much of a gap between 5 and 11 in this list. So if you told me you had Ant, if you in the comments are like, I think Ant's number 11, I'd be like, cool, got it. I have Embiid at 11. I don't have much of a gap at all between Ant and Embiid. That's not the way this list is meant to be organized. These guys are splitting hairs, right? However, what did I say the tiers were called? Bottom tier was like best players that can't be the best player on a championship team. That second tier was worst players that can be the best player on a championship team. The tier that we just finished today, the tier that we just finished today is like superstars that aren't perennial MVP candidates. What's my top tier? Perennial MVP candidates. I think Anthony Edwards is going to be a top 5 MVP candidate each of the next 5 years. He just finished 7th in MVP last year, and he wasn't as good in the regular season as he was in the postseason. If Ant played the way he did in the postseason, in the regular season, he would have probably finished 2nd or 3rd in MVP. That's the thing. It's the cutoff. The tier cutoff was perennial MVP candidates. That automatically put Ant in at number 5 for me because that's the way my tiers worked. Now, here's the thing. Let's talk about it. Out of all those players, so Ant, AD, Tatum, LeBron, KD, Steph, Embiid, right? Did I get that right? Yeah, I think so. So that's our 7 guys. Let's talk about them. Is Embiid going to be an MVP candidate next year? I don't think so because of load management, right? Anthony Davis, I think he has a shot, but I don't think the Lakers are good enough. And AD, one of the issues is he doesn't play as hard consistently in the regular season as some of his peers, so I don't think AD would get it. Is it Jason Tatum? I don't think he's good enough, and I don't think his team is good enough. Tatum has just one top 5 MVP finish in his entire career. Is it KD? No, he's too old. LeBron? No, he's too old. Steph? No, he's too old. So that's really it. Like, of all those guys, who is most likely to be a top 5 MVP candidate each of the next 5 years, it's obviously Ant. I think he'll finish 3rd or 4th in MVP next year. So, like, for me, like, that just was the cutoff, was Ant's a perennial MVP candidate. Now, within the context of the totality of the criteria, I want to wait to break that down until we get to the show on Monday, and we will go into detail, because the other thing, too, is, like, he's a freaky athlete, and he plays super hard. He played 79 games last year and 79 games the year before that. So, like, you can book Edwards for 80 games and MVP level production. That's a huge value add. And then the guy that everyone thinks is a bad playoff player, the guy that I'm ranking like 9, 10, 11 in terms of like for a series that start tomorrow, just averaged 28, 7, and 7 on 60% true shooting in a Western Conference Finals run. So like, I get it. I know people are lower on Ant than I am. And to be clear, I'm not basing this on last year. I am projecting. I think Ant is going to be the 5th best foundational piece of a franchise for an entire season this coming year. That's the way that is supposed to work. But again, we'll get much more into that as we head into next week. I think there should be something said about players like Giannis, AD, and Tatum, who are elite defenders but also manage to put up 25 to 30 points per game while being the focal points of their respective teams' offenses. Yes, their offense may be inconsistent at times and not as flashy, but aside from a few brutal series, they've been always elite two-way playoff performers. Totally agree. And by the way, that's why I have all those guys ahead of the older guys like KD, LeBron, and Steph, even though those guys are better for a playoff series. It's all about like just overall two-way impact over an 82-game context. It's just a comment I'm going to read. I don't have any response, but it's just a comment that I thought made an interesting point about Tatum. I've got to say, I appreciate hearing all the Tatum defending. I've always loved the show, but as a Celtics fan, there have been a few times where I was really disappointed with how often you pointed out his flaws and how rarely you give him credit for what he did right. Don't get me wrong, in no way am I saying that pointing out Tatum's flaws wasn't all unwarranted. He does have flaws, and I'll be the first one to tell you night to night, Tatum can look like one of the best players in the league, and then other days he can have days where he smokes 4 or 5 easy layups. But even on those off nights, he finds ways to impact the game in big ways. However, over the course of this last postseason, I was very encouraged by Tatum because even with the massive shooting slump he was impacting the game in every other way. He intentionally got switches onto Luka, drove right past him, forcing someone to come help, leading to wide open kick-out passes. I just wanted to take the time to give you credit for being upfront and unbiased, even when you've said you don't necessarily love Tatum's game. From time to time, you still give him his credit and came to his defense against players those of us who have watched on the channel for a long time know you love and root for. So I just wanted to be sure you know as a basketball fan that I appreciate the objectivity. And as I said in the comment on the last video, he was absolutely right. There's one thing we can all agree on. It's about the basketball. Love the show. Thank you so much for the kind words and the support. And I totally agree about your breakdown of Tatum and the way that he is discussed. And I know that I've been a little too negative with him over the course of the last year. The big thing is and I was actually tweeting about this morning, it's interesting. He's a 26-year-old superstar, in the heart of his prime, who's in a massive slump. He went from having everything we just talked about in the playoffs to going 0 for 16 on jump shots in the Olympics and getting benched. It's just interesting. It's an interesting story, and that's why we've been talking about it a lot. And there's something to be said about consistent success is boring, right? And that's something I try to fight against, but it's kind of natural that it comes out, and I just have to do a better job. AD is a proven number 2 guy. How can he be above Braun when Braun leads them in all the high leverage moments, runs the offense, and still outscores AD per game in the regular season and playoffs? First of all, AD could absolutely win on his own with the right roster. I mean, we just saw Tatum win. I think the Celtics would still win the title if they had AD. I actually think they'd be a little better with AD than if they had Tatum. The main reason why is I think if you gave me Jaylen Brown, Anthony Davis, Derek White, Drew Holiday, if you gave me that type of defensive foundation, I think they'd be the best. I think they'd be one of the greatest defenses of all time. And then the second piece of it is KD and Steph. You can't I understand for MVP purposes, I don't think AD is going to win an MVP because he plays next to LeBron, but that doesn't mean AD is not still a top tier superstar. KD and Steph played together for years. That doesn't mean that neither of them get to be called a superstar just because they play alongside another one. I don't That to me shouldn't matter. Again, it was a different thing in Golden State too, because they didn't just have KD and Steph. They also had Clay. They also had Draymond. They also had Andre Iguodala. That team was ridiculous. But I don't necessarily think for the sake of this type of list, you would punish AD. Like, for instance, in that era that KD and Steph were playing together, I thought they were the second and third best players in the league. I thought, like, even though they were playing together, I thought it was LeBron, Steph, KD. Like, they were still right there. Just so staggering that after 20 years, this guy is still an all-NBA performer. He's talking about LeBron. I've never seen anything like it in over 50 years following the league. Players like Kareem had incredible longevity, but none of them were playing at this level at the end of their careers. Got to be one of the strongest reasons to think of LeBron as the greatest ever. Jordan may have had the greatest peak ever, but he was a shell of himself when he retired. What we are watching is nearly a miracle. I totally agree, and that's LeBron's case. As I've said, like, in a similar kind of framework, we've crafted this list as like if you were starting a season that starts in October. My GOAT case list is like if I was starting a career. Like if I was launching a franchise, like if we had all 30 franchises starting from scratch and it wasn't just one season, but we were playing out those players' careers, I would want LeBron as the number one pick because we're about to have his 22nd straight year of like all-star level production. And, like what, 19th straight year or 20th straight year of all NBA level production. Like that gives me as a GM a lot of leeway to make mistakes, to figure out what works, to, as we talk about, there's all these other things. Like sometimes KD and Steph join each other and they're just going to be really hard to beat. Sometimes your co-stars get hurt, right? Like Kyrie and Kevin Love, right? Like sometimes your star gets hurt, right? Like there's all these different things that can happen. And so what you're really looking for is shots at the table, right? Like it's like if we were playing roulette. But I was placing your bets for you. If I gave you just one bet, like you only have a, slightly below 50% chance of winning, right? But like if I gave you 5 chances, like you're gonna win at like 1 or 2 of them at least, right? And that's kind of the way I look at it in terms of that GOAT debate. Like if I have 20 plus years of all NBA level production from LeBron, like that just gives me a really good chance to win more titles than the other players that have come in NBA history. I'm not a huge LeBron fan, but what's the argument for AD over him or Steph or Durant or Embiid? Guys that lead their teams and are the number one options each night. And we've seen AD lead teams and wasn't very successful, although he was healthy last season. 21 and 22 cost the Lakers by his injuries. We take LeBron off that team, they're worse than you took AD off of it. Same as if we switch Steph with AD, the Lakers are good and the Warriors are worse. Between injuries and inconsistency offensively, how do you have AD over guys like KD, Curry, LeBron, and Embiid? If your take is defense, I would personally take an offensive juggernaut over a guy that is inconsistent on offense, but a defensive anchor. Thanks. Keep up the good work. Thank you for supporting the show. You'll notice I have the offensive engines over him. I have, Shea over him. I have Luka over him. I have Jokic over him. The only offensive engines I have below him are guys like Embiid or Steph, who Steph's old and is showing some signs of decline, and Embiid is constantly hurt. But like I agree that like the offensive engine types are over AD, but like AD is a much more impactful regular season player than LeBron, in my opinion. Like if LeBron sat out a regular season game, you felt like Austin, D'Lo, and AD had a good chance to win. But if AD was out and they were playing somebody decent, it was like automatic loss. That's what it felt like as a fan watching. And I can't remember the exact numbers, but they're like something like 3-7 over the last 10 games that AD missed. So like they pretty consistently lose when he's out. Like I'm not going to put him over the offensive engine types at the top of the league, but an overall impact, especially with what he brings defensively, I just have him above the guys that we have below. And I went extensively about that in the earlier part of this show. Anthony Edwards and Jason Tatum are not better than LeBron, Steph, or KD. Again, totally agree. Series starts tomorrow. Give me LeBron, Steph, or KD. That's not how it works, though. The format of this list is October to June. I need to survive the regular season. Ant's going to play 79 games. Tatum's going to play 74 games. They're both going to put up crazy production. LeBron, Steph, and KD, they might play 70 games. They might also play 50 games. They might impact winning at a superstar level for 30 of those games and at a star level for another 30 of those games. Whereas like Ant and Jason Tatum are just like, they're athletic wrecking balls that are going to play out, like just impact winning a ton over the course of 82 games. 2 more questions. For the mailbag, how much of LeBron's effort do you think is laziness and how much is necessary coasting? Or does it not matter? Lack of effort is lack of effort either way. Naturally, it's going to be a bit of both, but we've seen what happens when LeBron exerts too much throughout the whole game. He gets gassed and can't affect the game as much in second halves. Love the show. Keep up the great work. I think it's 100% necessary coasting. LeBron is just too much of a winner in his career to be lazy, but he's coasting to try to conserve energy. The problem is the Lakers roster isn't as good as you'd like it to be able to actually allow him to coast the way that he does. Last question. Jason, thank you for taking the time to make these videos and to read this comment. I want to play a little devil's advocate for my guy. Now that we are at the top of the list, and in my opinion, he does not belong in this tier, from all of the playoff teams, last year only one team did not have a top 25 player on your list. I'm sure you know I'm talking about the Orlando Magic. I know you had him at 26 or 27, but there are players on the list that are at best number 2 on their team and some other players that have yet to accomplish anything in the NBA. If we are basing this list on the upcoming year's potential, I find it hard to believe that Paolo Banchero is not a top 25 player in the NBA. Thanks. Thank you again for the time and keep up the great content. I'm almost certain he'll be in it next year. He was just on the fringe for me. Don't forget, I don't see much separation in that bottom tier. So from 18, which I think was Bam, all the way to 45, I kind of all have them in a similar grouping. Like, I think you could make a case for Paul George to be on this list. You can make a case for James Harden to be on this list. You can make a case for Trae Young to be on this list. You can make a case for Paolo Banchero to be on this list. A bunch of different guys that we can look at there. I'm a huge fan of Paolo. Thought he had incredibly impressive first-round playoff series. The Magic are going to be a team we cover very closely this year. But yeah, he just barely missed the cut for me in this year. And the main reason why is, like, I don't think he's good enough as a number 1 yet to really get his team that close. The jump shooting and kind of just overall half court decision making piece just has a long way to go. But I'm a huge believer in Paolo. Like, I remember we got in a big debate, me and Sam Vecini, and he's a big Franz Wagner guy and I'm a big Paolo guy. And like, that's kind of where him and I disagree, is like, he thinks Franz is going to be the best player in the long run. I think Paolo is going to be. Really excited to see how that all shakes out though, especially now that we add KCP into the mix as a real veteran 2-guard. All right, guys, that's all I have for today and for the weekend. We will be back starting with number 5 and number 4 next Monday. As always, I appreciate you guys and we will see you then.